What's on your radar, Briahna?
Well, did the CIA kill JFK? It's a question on millions of minds following last Thursday's release of thousands of JFK assassination records. More than 13,000 documents were released by Biden, but 3% of records remain redacted, and the disclosure of over 4,400 documents has been delayed by the Biden administration. Now, under the 1992 John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Collection Act, which Biden voted for as a senator, all documents related to the assassination were supposed to be released by 2017. Donald Trump was the first president to violate this obligation, releasing only a partial batch back in 2017. Why? Well, reportedly, he was under extreme pressure from his CIA director, Mike Pompeo, not to release the remaining documents. According to reporting at the time, releasing the full trove of documents would be, quote, infuriating to people at the CIA and elsewhere who are determined to keep at least some of the information secret. Now, after Biden's impartial disclosure, more and more people are asking, what is there to hide? Biden is justifying his non-disclosure under an exception to the 1992 JFK Records Act, namely to protect against an identifiable harm to the military defense, intelligence operations, law enforcement, or the conduct of foreign relations. But Kennedy's murder was nearly 60 years ago. It's difficult to imagine which intelligence officers out in the field or what geopolitical arrangements might be damaged by new revelations about the slain president. But the language of the act itself is revealing. Documents may be kept from disclosure to protect intelligence operations, perhaps more specifically, to protect those intelligence operations from criticism. And given the lack of confidence the conservative public now has in these deep state institutions following the Twitter files disclosures and the Trump investigation, it's no wonder Biden might not be eager to add fuel to the fire. Now, Tucker Carlson tackled this issue in a monologue last week that already has over 1 million views. In it, he purported to have proof that the CIA was, in fact, involved in Kennedy's murder. Let's take a listen.
We spoke to someone who had access to these still hidden CIA documents, a person who was deeply familiar with what they contain. We asked this person directly, did the CIA have a hand in the murder of John F. Kennedy, an American president? And here's the reply we received verbatim. Quote, the answer is yes. I believe they were involved. It's a whole different country from what we thought it was. It's all fake. It's hard to imagine a more jarring response than that. Again, this is not a, quote, conspiracy theorist that we spoke to. Not even close. This is someone with direct knowledge of the information that once again is being withheld from the American public. And the answer we received was unequivocal. Yes, the CIA was involved in the assassination of the president.
Now, it might just be my lawyer brain, but I believe they were involved is far from the conclusive proof I was expecting. Moreover, I have concerns about relying on an unidentified source for such bombshell conclusions, especially when crucial documents that might, in fact, provide conclusive evidence are still in the wind. But Tucker Carlson raised some legitimately important issues in this segment, including interrogating the weirdness of JFK's assassin being immediately assassinated himself, and the fact that the term conspiracy theory was coined to cast doubt on those who doubted the official reports on Kennedy's death. Interesting stuff. He also was right in one other important area, giving credit to the left for recognizing that the FBI and CIA are anti-democratic entities long before the right, back when conservatives considered it to be something like a patriotic duty to protect those institutions. Take a listen.
You've laid it out really well, and it used to be that conservatives like me dismissed theories from the left about JFK's assassination as just left-wing conspiracy theories. But over time, I think that the left looks as if they were quite justified in not trusting the intelligence services. And I think the WMD pretext for the Iraq War was a red pill, a slowly dawning red pill for me.
Remember, leftists, not liberals, but leftists, have been highly critical of the FBI and CIA since FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover dedicated 85% of its illegal covert intelligence resources toward attacking left groups like the NAACP, Vietnam protesters, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the Black Panther Party, Puerto Rican independence movements, and the American Indian Movement. A mere 15% of the FBI's energy went toward far-right targets, like the Ku Klux Klan. During the McCarthy era, the FBI used a variety of illegal practices in pursuit of alleged communists, which is a political identification, I'll remind you, that is totally legal. They burglarized, illegally opened mail, and set wiretaps. The National Lawyers Guild, one of the few legal organizations willing to stick their neck out and defend communists, was broken into at least 14 times by the FBI over a period of about 4 years. They also drugged and extrajudicially murdered Fred Hampton. That's no conspiracy theory. That's fact. And many believe the FBI and/or CIA were involved in the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. as well. The traditional conservative posture of indifference to this stuff until it hurts them and their interests is exactly how these agencies have amassed the unchecked power they have now. It's quite literally a case of Martin Niemöller's, famous poem, "First they came for the socialists and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. And then they came for the trade unionists and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came for me and there was no one left to speak for me." Now, here we are. Will there be a sustained bipartisan criticism of the FBI and CIA? If proof that the CIA murdered one of America's most beloved presidents doesn't do the trick, what will? Now, this matters because the deep state's corruption is ongoing. See Twitter Files Part 8. The Intercept just reported yesterday evening that Twitter, a private company, remember, protected the Pentagon's social media misinformation network. The military used accounts that concealed their affiliation with the Pentagon to manipulate public media perceptions, and Twitter helped. Here's the story. Reporter Lee Fong, my former colleague at The Intercept, was allowed to make document requests of Twitter over the course of 3 days last week. And look at what he found. In 2017, a U.S. Central Command official named Nathaniel Collar emailed a Twitter representative with a request to approve the verification of an account and whitelist a list of Arab language accounts that they, quote, use to amplify certain messages. Now, as annoying as celebrity blue checks can be, deep state blue checks are a whole other ballgame. Collar went on to write that, quote, a few of these had built a real following, complaining that some of these bots weren't indexing on hashtags and speculating that they might have been flagged as bots. So Central Command called the manager over some of its fake news accounts being flagged as bots when in fact they were inauthentic accounts. I mean, it's incredible stuff. What were those accounts tweeting about? Well, some were promoting U.S.-supported militias in Syria and anti-Iran messages in Iraq. And how did Twitter respond? The same day the government made its request, quote, Twitter's site integrity team went into an internal company system used for managing the reach of various users and applied a special exception tag. Nice to know that while authentic left-leaning accounts were getting shadow banned, the government's bots got special Twitter exemptions. Now, you should read Fong's full account at The Intercept and learn about how Twitter profiles with deepfake photos were used to shape public opinion about the military's role overseas and Twitter's role in concealing all of it. You should also keep in mind that the national intelligence budget is nearly $90 billion this year, 70% of which went to defense contractors, according to a 2007 report. While our politicians complain about not being able to raise the minimum wage or extend the child tax credit, pointing to migrants at the border as the source of all of your problems, they're funding the deep state with impunity to harass, prosecute, and even murder activists, civil rights icons, and maybe even presidents. And sometimes they even get the public sector, Twitter, to give them an assist. I think this was perhaps, I mean, people can argue, but perhaps the most significant Twitter files drop. And it might be apparent that I was already riding my radar when it dropped, and I just had to include it. And there was this nice overlap between this realization that, look, there was a really healthy and growing skepticism of the intelligence community right now, and I'm so glad to see it. And it's exactly for reasons that were disclosed in the Twitter files that we have to keep that energy up and stay with this kind of right-left solidarity over applying pressure to these institutions that really have had no sincere, sustained pressure on them since the time of their founding.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the conservative movement is moving in a direction of skepticism of law enforcement, and that's a very good thing, in part because of the perception that law enforcement, the FBI, the deep state is so against Trump, and so they've been seeing how it can be weaponized against their own side. And also, to the extent there's a libertarian strain on the right, I mean, libertarians like myself have always been skeptical of government, and that means being skeptical of law enforcement and the police and national intelligence services, or considering what do they have at stake? What is in their self-interest? Is it necessarily the public good, or do they have something else going on? And that has always been a part of the right. It's been regrettable, I think, in the kind of maybe the 80s, 90s, and aughts. The Republican Party became very much a neoconservative party, and that was accompanied by a just kind of utter blind faith in what national security experts were telling you, what the G-men were telling you, the spies, those kinds of people. Before that, there was a lot of skepticism of centralization in government and the expert class, et cetera. So I'm that's just to say that I'm glad that strain is being rediscovered and hopefully can be deployed toward actually useful ends, which means limiting the authorities of these people.
Yes. Now, look, I want to be positive and, capitalize on what I think is a sincere frustration, what's going on with some of these institutions. But I feel like it would be remiss for me not to point out that historically what has happened is, I think that you're right, there has always been some quantity of conservatives who have been woke and understood what was going on here. But when we're talking about the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, when we're talking about the growth of the Hoover FBI as we know it, and all of those anti-communist activities, those were very conservative projects. Well, and criticizing those institutions was very much seen as anti-patriotic. Like the identification of those institutions with the national interest in American patriotism and anti-communism and Cold War efforts and all of that was very bound up together. So I don't put that out there as a criticism. That's just to say we have to keep in mind that it's not always going to be clear that these unaccountable institutions that have so much power and can cause so much harm are your enemy in particular. But we have to have an analysis that's separate and apart from our own personal self-interest.
That's true, although the terms liberal and conservative and also what Republicans and Democrats stood for back then starts to get much messier. I mean, you have Democratic administrations, you could argue they're conservative if you're using conservative, right?
I definitely would.
I'm sure you would. And in fact, the Republican Party is the progressive party in the teens.
But establishment, non-establishment is better, because the Liberal Party was also not a big fan of the communists and the leftists at the time either. So I take your point.
Yeah. It's very interesting stuff. All right, we'll have more Rising right after this. Stay with us.